Good morning, everyone. So far we've had singing, we've had dancing. You might have ambitious expectations of what I'm going to present here. So, well, as Carol mentioned, right after Harvey hit, there were a lot of groups out taking samples, environmental quality samples. There were water sampling groups and air quality sampling groups. We had people out doing energy studies. And several of you are here in this room today. And what we really want to try to do was get the word out on what were some of those environmental impacts of Harvey. What happened immediately after the storm? What was the aftermath for Houston in terms of those specific environmental impacts? And so with the grant from Houston Endowment, we actually were able to move forward with this work. So what we did is working with all these organizations who, by the way, were amazing. You know, a short time after the storm was, they were out there sampling. They were out there doing their work. We were able to get into contact with them. We were able to gather up this data and develop it into this story map you see. And I don't know, that URL is kind of hard for me to see, but it's harveyimpacts.research.org. And we have bookmarks. I have them. And there's some in the back on our table too that shows that URL. And so a story map is kind of a nice way for those of you who aren't familiar with it of telling a story through a map. And so there's a variety of ways you can do this. Because this one was so heavily data intensive, we worked with this tabular format. So up here at the top you can see these tabs. And we had different sections depending on what kind of data there were. I'm going to walk you through some of this morning and then leave you to explore on your own because we are working with limited time. So we're going to start with this water tab. And you can see that under there, there is a discussion point here on what the water carried. A person could scroll through this area right here and get more in-depth conversation on what was in the sediment, what did some of those samples show. The panel on the right, that discussion, is more of an overview for people. You can also scroll through.
Not so easy.
No, it's not. I thought I had it. Back, that way. Is he there? Oh, I got it. All right. So this is salinity and temperature. So you can see we have data samples here from NOAA and USGS that went out, and this is really within those first 10 days or so after the storm, taking those water quality sample measurements for both salinity and temperature. And while it wasn't surprising based on the amount of rain we got, the dips in salinity were very surprising for the system. It went incredibly low for several days in a row. Can you click on the next one? Okay, so if you, whoops, one back, I think. There. So if you click on any point in the map while you're scrolling through there, you can actually get the data that were gathered on that map. So you can see for that time period what the temperature, what the salinities, min and max were in the average. And if you really want to drill down to it, so give me one more. There's the graph that's associated with that point. Look at that dip. Look at that dip in such a short amount of time. So people were really interested in this salinity data set. And I should mention that almost everything that I'm going to talk about today is available for download off this site so that you can download the data and then do analysis and do with it as you please. But we had a lot of downloads and a lot of questions on the salinity dip, particularly about some of the impacts on the ecosystem, some of the impacts on the oysters, on how quickly the salinity went back up and what that meant for that estuary system. Let's go on to the next one. I can talk more about this one. It's kind of a cool story. All right. We also were out, there were a lot of groups out sampling bacteria. And what we did here is, you can see this is from 8/15, so you're going to see some of the samples beforehand so you can compare it. And then through 9/28, so several days after the storm, and people were sampling up and down the coast to see the impacts. not only immediately after the storm, but then also as those inflows went through and we had all that fresh water coming, how soon did it take for the bacteria levels to go down? Because of course, in the first aftermath of the storm, you had all the surface runoff that carried all the bacteria. We had, of course, the treatment plants that failed. We had lots of overflow. You had lots of bacteria in the water. I had a neighbor ask me if it was okay for the kids to go out and play in the water. No. No. And you'll see why. Can we have the next one? So here at the very, very bottom are the red line and the blue line. I don't know if you can make those out, but that's where your bacteria should be under for, say, contact recreation if you don't want to get kind of an illness if that water gets into your stomach. And you can see we had several spots very high over. 925 was the date, so you see those slots in red show some of the high points that were reached afterwards. So you can see that if you go into the map for every sampling point throughout there, you can go back. So if there's an area you're specifically interested in and how it impacted, especially maybe around where you live, you can look at that data. So this shows the coverage of the NEXRAD rainfall, where the great areas were that got hit the most. And then you can actually also look at flow at that time and see which of those gauges, specifically that Dr. Gam was talking about, that were over during that time. And if you click on the gauge, go ahead, you can see by how much it actually went over the historical flooding. So every gauge has that kind of red line, and you can see whether or not it went over and how much it went over the previous historical flooding timeline. So we also have this air quality, and at the bottom right, you can see that it's scrolling through the days. Okay, this is actually the 8-hour ozone concentrations. Thank you. Where she was highlighting there on the bottom right, it's going through some of the days right before, right after, and then during, and you can see how right afterwards some of those ozone air quality meters went way, way up. We also have the same thing for toxics. Give me one more click. So this is the same thing, except I'm not, yeah, at the bottom right again, you see it's scrolling through the days beforehand. We're on the 20th, 21st. And so you'll see these two air meters. Everything goes offline, of course, right immediately after Harvey. We have two static air meters there. And then also, as soon as possible, some air quality vans were going out and driving around. And so that's why you see those two at first. But the air toxics went really high in the aftermath of Harvey. We don't even know how high because, of course, they went offline during the storm and a couple days afterwards. Give me one more. I think we highlighted a graph that show the BTEX compounds. So there you can really see that's a lot more dramatic. You know, this is your typical kind of BTEX compounds on the left here in that time period beforehand. In the 25, again, you see those air monitors go offline, and then as soon as they can get them back online, you see those steep increases in the BTEX compounds. This talks about hazardous incidence reports. This is actually the National Response Center. These are voluntary reports. But this is kind of interesting, particularly if you live around these areas. You can go in and see self-reported, and a lot of the plants actually have to do this, so you can see what was spilled, if people ran across things that were hazardous or things of that nature. And with each incident in this, you can click on it and see exactly what was spilled and the type of incident. Let's go one more. And one more. And then I'm going to end on this Superfund site. This actually was another surprising thing, at least for me. These are the Superfund sites in Houston. And you can see here the triangles are the federal ones, the circles are the state ones. If they're in purple, they were impacted by the storm. Look at that. Look at the number of Superfund sites in our city that were impacted by the storm. And these data were actually kind of hard to come by, like most of the flooding data. You don't know, until a long time afterwards exactly how high and how much and things of that nature. But these are supposed to be self-reported, and so we were able to kind of get some of these data. But I think this is an interesting statement, and this is something that I think we as a group should really be focused on for that next event. That is a lot of Superfund sites, that's a lot of toxic runoff, that's a lot of things that we don't want in our water. And I think I'll end there because I'm out of time.
Good morning. In 2001, my wife and I went to northern Waller County,